You've talked about feeling rejected early in life, and everybody can relate to that. But your rejection seems to have been more wholesale and deeply felt. And were girls? Let me say it like this: did you feel acceptable and beautiful as a girl when you were really young? Do you remember feeling pretty?
There were times when I did, and there were other times when I really scrutinized every part of myself. And a big part of it was that I started to go through puberty fairly early, which today is actually pretty standard. Girls are starting to go through puberty younger and younger.
Around what age, if I could
Personally,
be?
like my breasts started to develop when I was about 8 or 9 years old. And it was tough having that kind of attention on me. And in the environment that I was growing up in, I had like a lot of my peers were very precocious. They were talking about things that at the age that we really should not have known anything about. Things like sex, women's bodies, the things that they would see.
Things they would see where were they getting?
Their phones, where whatever devices their parents were letting them use, just completely unrestricted.
Right.
And I also had unrestricted internet access from a pretty young age as well. So I had a lot of exposure to a lot of ideas that were just too adult, it was just too early.
Sure.
And I felt like a lot of my worth as a woman was going to come from my looks, from my body and my sexuality. And if I didn't have much to provide in terms of that, I didn't know where my identity as a woman would really come from.
Sure. I can see how that could happen. And do you directly attribute that to access to the internet and social media before you were ready?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I got my first personal computer, I think at 9 or 10 years old. And then eventually I had, at roughly the same age, just started like handing out laptops at school to the entire school district. Students as young as 5th grade could take them home and just do whatever on them. And then I got
no
my
blockers
first
or anything?
smartphone. Oh no, they started off with like no blockers at all for any websites.
Seems like just a poorly devised plan.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of kids got in trouble for like viewing pornography on their devices.
Yeah.
And then I got my first phone right before my 12th birthday, and I think that was really that was even more destructive because, I mean, a laptop wouldn't always. It doesn't have access to a cellular network, so you can't just access the internet from
Right.
everywhere.
Sure.
But now, like
anytime, anywhere.
all of that, I could access it just from my pocket.
Right.
And now I was using social media apps that everybody else my age was using.
Like which ones?
It was Instagram and Snapchat were some of the main ones.
Sure.
But Instagram was kind of like my platform of choice, just because like it's very, very image oriented, very, very easy to use, very easy to connect with people on there. And I had like a lot of people that I knew from school on there.
Yeah.
So I wanted to see what was up. Because a lot of my friends were like, they got their first phones, some of them as early as like first or second grade.
Way early.
And I wanted to see like what they were doing on there. I wanted to see what they were up to because these are my peers, and I already feel kind of disconnected from them. So I wanted to see if this was another way to get to them, and also it was a way to explore communities around some of my own personal interests outside of school and people that I knew from school. And I browsed a lot of those communities that were mainly around like video games, illustration, artwork, anime, shows that I watched.
Yeah.
And that's actually how I got sucked in to the transgender community. It was through those communities because a lot of the people within those communities were young men and women and girls and boys who identified with the LGBT. Many of them they called themselves like gay or bisexual or lesbian. And a lot of them were kids my age who called themselves transgender and overwhelmingly female.
Right.
And it was just, I think the overlap between those two things is that a lot of people who identify with LGBT in my generation are very artistic. Many of them are a little bit more on the nerdy side. Many of them are very socially awkward. They have like specialized interests.
Kind of
And
eccentric.
they struggle to find a community like at school or in person. So as many of them do, they turn to the internet. And that was what I did.
Yeah.
And it was something that intrigued me quite a bit.
Sure.
With all these novel concepts to me, these new terms with which you could describe yourself and explore your identity and explain it to the people to other people, and like all the colorful flags and the way that they talked about this, like it was like a journey of self-discovery. And finding like your own niche, a community and it seems so tightly knit. It seems so loving and happy, and these people were funny and relatable. And I mean, it sucked me in.
Yeah.
Like it was just so cool to me. I had never really related to a group of people so much in my entire life up until that point.
Yeah. So at what point do you remember first sort of identifying outwardly as a male rather than a female?
It was a very slow process for me, actually. I wanted to just kind of gradually get used to it, starting online by changing my display name, asking people to call me a boy.
What was
and
the
then
name you
slowly
chose, just out of curiosity?
I went through a few different names. I think the first few ones I chose were like, I don't know, like Caleb, Kai.
Sure.
And then I eventually settled with Leo because it was like, it's convenient. Like it's 3 letters out of my real name.
Oh yeah. Okay.
And I didn't want to get too far from the source material. I wanted to be faithful to what my mom and dad gave me, just a little bit.
Yeah. Interesting.
But eventually, like I started slowly cutting my hair shorter and shorter and swapping out the clothing in my bedroom, my closet, with more clothing from like the boys and men's department.
Right.
I found it kind of difficult to adjust to because men's and women's clothing sizes are quite different.
Yes.
And there's not like a whole lot of men's clothes that come in the size of a 5'4" female, you know? So
5'4" post-pubescent female. Yeah, it's hard to find.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I was 12 at the time. Eventually, I started telling a very select few people at school about it.
Okay.
And a lot of them actually were like, what do you mean you're a boy? Like,
Yeah.
like these are people who had known me since elementary school, right? I wasn't fooling anybody. They didn't think I was a boy. And a lot of them actually took like a very negative reaction to it, which I feel kind of propelled me further into my transition, because it's like, a lot of them were like, they were being jerks about it, just because like I was presenting myself differently, I was really just trying to
Express yourself.
discover myself.
Sure.
It could have been something that was benign, but it felt like,
I wonder, had they treated it like no big deal, if you would have just been like, oh, well, I guess that's not as
I think
impactful.
so. I think eventually like it would have been, does this really even matter? Like, do I have to call myself this? Do I have to do all this stuff? But because like they were so on me about it, it was like, I'm going to prove them wrong.
Sure.
Like I really believe that I am a boy, and they are going to understand that one day. I'm going to look and sound just like a boy, and that's
Yeah.
how they're going to know me.